Welcome to today's podcast, Let's Talk VI Sport. I'm really excited to introduce today Ellen Buttrick, who is a Paralympic gold medalist from the Tokyo 2020 Games. And she's a trustee of Love Rowing, which is a mission to be able to open the doors of rowing wider and bring physical, mental and emotional benefits to rowing to more people than ever before. I know that Ellen's done many other things as well and been involved in many rowing championships. So I just want to say a quick hello. Hello, Ellen. Nice to see you.
Hello. Thanks very much for having me on the podcast.
Glad that you're here. You've been involved with rowing for quite some time now. Do you want to tell me about your rowing journey and how it began?
Yeah, definitely. I started rowing in 2012. In 2011, I kind of saw that rowing was a thing that was happening locally to me. I was hoping to go to university in 2013, and I was going to be the first in my family to go to university if I did go. And so I wasn't sure about what the best way to apply, the best way to get in, and the best way to have a good personal statement. So I'd seen the boat race on TV, and I decided Oxford and Cambridge row, that must be what you need to go to university. And I also thought maybe I could make some friends as well. So I signed up. I was on the waiting list for a year, and then excitedly got to do it, the Learn to Row, literally the week of the London 2012 Olympic Games.
Oh,
it was really cool actually to watch the racing and then be able to go down, get in a boat and just learn the sport. So 2012 was a successful year for the GB rowing team. We got some of our first women's rowing medals, gold medals, like Helen Glover, Heather Stanning, Kat Copeland, who's a friend of mine now, whose race I got to watch. And I was inspired by the Olympics, to be honest, to carry on. And the fact that some of these people had only started rowing 4 years previously and were now winning gold medals. Then a few weeks later, it was the Paralympics. And I think the buzz of London 2012 and the Olympics made the buzz of the Paralympics even bigger. And also the amazing coverage that Channel 4 did and the investment they put into it. So I really enjoyed watching that. And during that period, I was like, this is an incredible thing to watch. These people are incredible. And if I had a disability, that's exactly what I'd want to be doing, which is my eyes. It was like making the best of a challenging situation. And I went off to university. Fortunately, it wasn't Oxford or Cambridge, but I did go to university. And when I was there, I was diagnosed with my sight impairment. And that's when I was like, well, I guess I'll be going to Paralympic Games then, because I'd set myself the challenge 2 years previously. And since then, I've been working towards trying to get to Paralympics. I finished my degree it was in Newcastle. That was in 2014. No, it was 2017, sorry. And then I went and did a talent ID day with the GB rowing team. Went in, got some tests done. Didn't think much of it, didn't think I'd get picked. And they were like, yep, you've got what it takes to be a champion in rowing potentially. So we want you to come down and train with us. And then about 3 months since joining the team, became a world champion. And from
then, that's amazing.
It was a whirlwind start to a career, definitely. And then it's been strange, I think, because it just feels so short because of the pandemic in the middle and then the games. But it's been 12 years now that I've been rowing.
And it doesn't feel like 5 minutes, I should imagine.
No, I still feel new. I still feel new to the sport. And it's interesting.
I still feel new to British blind sport, and this is my 14th year, so I'm with you there.
Nearly been rowing as long as you've been at British blind sport, though.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. You mentioned about your diagnosis being when you went to university. Is that correct? You'd started, and that's Stargardt disease, isn't it? Is that correct?
Yeah. Stargardt.
Tell us, how did that impact you personally, and also how did that impact sport? You've talked a little bit about, you then thought about becoming a Paralympian, but being diagnosed with something such as Stargardt's can be a real lot emotionally and mentally. So tell us a little bit about that when you first got diagnosed.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed in 2014 and I was 19, which is quite late to be diagnosed with Stargardt disease because it's juvenile macular degeneration and it usually impacts you, I think, from the age of 7 to 19. So I just got it. And it was, I think my eyes had started to deteriorate earlier, probably when I was 17 doing A-levels. And I'd been to eye hospitals in my local area, but they'd looked at them and they hadn't seen any problem. And so I'd been told actually that my eyes were over-focusing too hard, which my family found hilarious because that's the epitome of me, which is trying too hard at everything I do.
So even your eyes were trying to do that without you realising it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what the doctors told me. So I was like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. Mm-hmm. So carried on, did my driving test, passed my driving test, thinking that I didn't have an eye problem. Went to university and then started. And then when at university, I was struggling to see the board. And so I went to the opticians, and I actually went to about 5 different opticians around Newcastle. And I kept on being like, this prescription's wrong, I can't see properly. You keep giving me prescriptions. And then I'd go to another optician, I'd be like, this person's giving me this prescription, but I still can't see. And then eventually they referred me to the RVI in Newcastle. And I was just really lucky because there's like 2 people who were like specialists in Stargardt disease. And one of them was in Newcastle.
Yeah, that is very lucky.
And they managed to look at my scans and find that that's what I had. I remember the diagnosis conversation because I was like sat in the room. I'd gone to the hospital thinking there's nothing wrong. I've been told 2 years ago there's nothing wrong, so they're just going to tell me there's nothing wrong again. And then more and more people kept coming into the room, and I was like, this isn't going to be good. Like the fact that they keep bringing all these people in, and then they kind of explained it to me, and they were like, do you have any questions? And I was like, not really. And then later on I was like, I do have one question, and it was about the Paralympics basically and whether I could throw at it, which is probably not a good way to deal with something, but it was my way of being like, well, this is potentially going to take certain things away from me, like being able to drive, certain levels of independence. I didn't know at that point whether my sight would deteriorate further or how much it would deteriorate by. And I was like, but the thing that I could get from it is this opportunity to go to a Paralympics and to represent my country in rowing. And so I kind of went for that and just saw that as the thing and silver lining. And I was like, I'll just focus on the silver lining, and eventually I'm sure I'll like deal with the rest of it. But I think it was a good way for me to do it because I managed to then get through university, finish my degree. I've travelled, worked independently, and I've just done a master's. So I think just like that focus on like a goal really helped me to like deal with the challenges.
That is amazing. And it's interesting that you talked about rowing being your silver lining. And actually a lot of people do use sport as something to really focus on when they've had a difficult diagnosis or a difficult, a trauma or something unexpected happening in their lives, not just to do with sight loss. But tell us, for those people that you've used your para rowing to really sort of, have some amazing accomplishments, for those who are not familiar with para rowing, could you explain what the PR3 mixed Cox 4 is and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a sweep rowing boat. In rowing, there's 2 types of rowing. There's sculling, which is when someone has 2 rowing blades in their hands. And then there's sweep, which is when you have 1. And sweep rowing, similar to Oxford Cambridge boat race, if people have watched that. So you've got 1. And then in our boat, there's 4 of us that row, 2 men, 2 women. And then we have a coxswain who steers the boat and tells us what to do, basically, and is in charge of us. In the PR3 Mixed Cox 4, there's 3 classifications of para rowing: PR3, PR2, PR1. PR1's the most disabled category, and then PR3 is the minimal disability category. So that's the same as non-adaptive rowing. It's a sliding seat, and the boat actually includes people. You can have a maximum of 2 people with sight impairment in it, but it has people with physical impairment as well.
Wow, thank you. That's a really good explanation. And then you went on with your rowing. You represented Team GB at the Paralympics at the delayed event in Tokyo in 2021. There's a couple of things there, like how was the build-up representing GB on such a global stage during a time when restrictions were still in place? And how did you keep yourself motivated during the sort of like quite an uncertain period of time for sport?
I think until recently, I don't think I realised how close the Games was to being cancelled. I was at an event last week and they were talking about like the intricacies of organising Olympic or Paralympic Games. And they said like any day that Tokyo could have been cancelled. And I was like, oh, I didn't realise that. During the actual Games period, once the Olympics had happened or were happening, we were watching it back at Caversham and we were like, hopefully this all goes well, because if something happens here or there's like some sort of COVID outbreak, potentially the Paralympics could be cancelled. When we got out there as well, one of the things that we had to do was COVID test constantly throughout the day. And so until you pushed off for that final race, you didn't know if you were actually going to get to compete at the Paralympics. And we didn't have any spares in Tokyo with us because of the problems.
Restrictions?
Yeah, the restrictions, that's it. There was like 4 of us out there and 4 of us that could row. So if any of the 5 or our coach got COVID, we wouldn't have been able to do it. But I think the way that we kind of motivated ourselves to continue the training when the games were postponed was that we were all in our own homes. We all had Zoom, we had equipment, and we'd like meet up every day on Zoom and we'd do our sessions together. We were fortunate, I think, as a squad that we had the respect for each other and the commitment that we knew that everyone else was doing the training and that we could trust that they were doing the training. And we also believed that the games eventually would happen, and we wanted to be in the best position so that when we got to those games, we would be the world leading crew. PR3 Mixed Cox 4 is very successful. It's won gold medals since 2012. So that's 12 years now of gold. And it's something that's hard when you first get in the boat to handle, is that level of success. But once you're in it and once you're part of the legacy, it's something where you're like, right, this is the boat that we're in. People are coming to try and beat us, and we're going to show what we can do here every single year. And what we used to call it was like defining the event, basically.
Yeah.
Like setting the standard of the event.
Interesting though, because that's quite a big weight on your shoulders, knowing that the people before you, like the 12 years, as you say, it's great to have that confidence, but to know that you're a good team and you're in a good team. But I suppose there was a lot of pressure, additional pressure, to want to follow the people before you.
Yeah, there is a lot of pressure. And also it feels when you're in it, if we were to get a silver, it's as if that's a failure. Whereas if you don't win medals very often, if you're a crew that doesn't win and you won a silver, that would be amazing. Or if you won a gold, that would be incredible. Whereas like whenever we won the gold, it was like, yeah, of course they've won the gold. Like, tick.
Well, that is the mindset of an athlete for sure. Because I think if I got if actually not even just a bronze or a silver, if I just turned up and was allowed in the race, I'd be chuffed. But that's what sets you apart from others, is that gold is always going to be your aim. As a Paralympian yourself, you know, the COVID is over now, but there's always going to be pressures for Paralympic athletes. What advice would you give to our athletes who are in preparation for this year's Games in Paris?
The advice would probably be to make sure you enjoy it whilst you're out there, and to really enjoy the moment of being out in Paris at the event and the race itself. We had a lot of stress of the pandemic leading into Tokyo, but when we got to that village, we had a conversation as a crew. We're like, we really need to immerse ourselves in this experience, like really enjoy it, because we've worked so hard. I'd been training for 9 years for that moment, and you can get overwhelmed by the pressure, but then it's just an unenjoyable experience. Whereas like you've worked so hard, you're there, it's a once in a lifetime experience. So just make sure that you soak it in.
Yeah, that can be said, can't it? People sometimes miss the day itself because of the enormity of the event, and that's lovely to hear, and it's good advice to give to our Paralympic team. You've done so well. You know, you're a trustee of an organisation, Love Rowing, to help people to use rowing for the betterment of their own emotional well-being and physical well-being, and you've gone on to be a Paralympian. You're awarded an MBE in 2022, and I think that's very well deserved. How did you find out that you were being awarded for your contribution to rowing, and how did it make you feel?
Well, we got a letter. You get a letter that says, we're thinking of awarding you an MBE. Do you accept an MBE if we gave it to you? And you're like,
Who's
yes or no. Yeah, I know. Well, some people do. Yeah. I think one of the Mitchells did, because that's what my dad told me.
Yeah, John Lennon did, apparently.
Because when I rang my dad and I said, by the way, I'm getting an MBE, he was like, what? Like John Lennon? He was like, what have you done that's the same level as John Lennon? And I was like, Dad, people care about rowing. Like,
bless your dad that the first person he thought about in comparison to his daughter was John Lennon.
Yeah. So you get this letter, and eventually you get an official letter telling you that you're going to get it. And then on New Year's Day, it gets sent out into the media and put in the paper, which is very cool. And then we actually waited quite a while until November to go and collect our MBEs. So I'm quite lucky. I have a letter signed by the late Queen telling me that I'm getting the MBE. And then I was actually awarded it when King Charles was the king. So I probably got one of the last things signed by Elizabeth, which is
My
very
goodness.
cool.
That's something really special and something to be looked after, isn't it? That's amazing. And like I said, well deserved and well done. A couple more questions for us now. It's been lovely talking to you. What do you see as the challenges that blind and partially sighted athletes face today? And what I mean by that is not necessarily just elite athletes, such as yourself, but anyone who just wants to take up the sports and enjoy sports. And how do you think we can best overcome them?
That's a big question. Let me
It is.
think. From what I've experienced, I'd say it's probably accessibility to different sports and to different clubs. I think most sports now are doing a great job of trying to be more inclusive and to create programs that can deliver for people with different disabilities, including partially sighted people. I think that they're not really nationwide, they're not accessible to everybody. If you're not fortunate to live close to one of those places or clubs, then you're not going to be able to have the opportunity to participate. I think one of the barriers as well is the fact that people who are delivering these kinds of programs, a lot of them are volunteers within the sports sector, and a lot of people don't have much of a experience with disability, and so they don't understand how easy it is to adapt things for people with different disabilities to be able to compete or participate. I think it's more about raising awareness of adaptive sport, how easy it is, and also the benefits to the wider club and to the athletes themselves. I think that's kind of what we're trying to do. We love rowing.
That's great. And I do agree that is definitely the confidence, both in the potential participant, to grow that person's confidence, to know that they can have a good experience, but growing the confidence and the ability to be a coach. And you said something really important there, that many people delivering sport are volunteers. And we're so lucky and grateful that there's volunteers in the workforce. But, as sports, as organisations, we need to invest in those volunteers, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. I've seen coaching training courses around working with people with disabilities or with sight impairments that coaches can do. I think that's a really cool kind of thing, like development opportunities for people. It's just like making different coaches aware that those things exist and that they can do them, and then what the benefit is to the club. I think like they need to see what can the club gain from having a diverse group of people participating.
I completely agree with that. Last couple of questions. Who has been your sporting inspiration?
Probably Catherine Granger in terms of rowing, just because of watching her in London 2012. She was the first women's rowing race I watched. She won the gold medal. When I went to Caversham for the first time in 2017, she was at the top of the stairs when I got there, and I was like, I can't believe I've just seen Catherine Granger. I was awesome. I won the gold medal at the Worlds, and she was there to interview me for the BBC. And I was just like, I can't believe this is happening to me. And now I see her regularly at events because she's the UK sport chair. She's just lovely as well. And I just think it's great that she's transitioned so well from sport to a professional career. Yeah, definitely her.
So you've gone from being awestruck to probably a little bit blasé. You're right, Catherine, how are you doing?
I'm still quite excited every time I see her. And then if I get asked I've been asked this question by her, and I was like, it's you. she was like, oh, shut up.
She is lovely. I've been privileged to meet her a couple of times, and she's very down to earth and just has sport, coming out of her pores. She's doing whatever she can, not just for her sport, but for all sport to make a difference, which is great.
An experience with her where I was sat after the Tokyo Games, we were invited to Parliament for an event to celebrate, and it was a weird event anyway because we were got off the buses, we're going over, and all these MPs were running over to us and were congratulating us and telling us how happy they were that we'd done this for the country. We went in and we were sat on the balcony area of Westminster Terrace, that's what it's called.
Yeah,
and I was there with Gray Thompson and Catherine Granger, and then the chair of Paralympics GB and me, and I was like, what is happening? What is my life?
One of those pinch me moments.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's your sporting inspiration. Who outside of sport has been your biggest cheerleader?
I'd say my mum and my auntie, probably the two women who have pushed me the most and supported me and made me, every time I've had a challenging time, I can call them and they'll talk me through all the positives of like what I can do. They've never really said to me, you can't do this, you can't do that. They've always been like, oh, you want to do this? Go to a Paralympics. Okay. Oh, you want to go and do a master's here? That's fine. I'm hoping to travel next year around the world, basically. And they're like, yeah, of course you can travel around the world, even though you can't barely see. Like, of course you can do that. That's kind of what you want, isn't it? You want people to be like, team you and being like, yeah, how can we help you with that? And so, yeah, them two are probably the ones.
Team you, and strong women breed strong women. And you obviously come across as a very capable young lady. And I suspect very much that your mum and your auntie are very capable women. And that's great to hear. Final question, and it has been such a pleasure talking to you today. What is the best piece of advice someone has ever given you, whether that's in sport or outside of sport?
I was fortunate to do the Women's Sport Trust Unlocked programme in 2020. And I was actually partnered with Tanya Gray Thompson as my mentor during that period. Early on in our conversations, we got to meet once before the pandemic, and then mostly it was just online because of the lockdowns. I'd gone to her with my plan. This is what I'm doing in sport. This is what I want to do after sport. This is the kind of difference I want to make, and I want to have them do a master's. And she was like, you can do it all now. You don't need to section it off and be like, this is my athlete section. This is when I'm then going to do my work section. She was like, if you try and do all of the things at the same time, then you can develop. It's really good to develop whilst you're an athlete and to use the platform that being an athlete gives you, because it gives you a lot of sway to be able to make change. And so that was the best piece of advice, I think, which was just to not be scared to try different things whilst you're still an athlete.
That's very sage advice coming from one of the most respected women in disability sport, and someone who I know as well, and she's fantastic. You very blessed to have had her as your mentor. She's a good one. Continue to develop, continue to grow, continue to be the amazing trustee for Love Rowing and big athlete that you are. We wish you well with your career in the future, and I certainly wish you well with your travelling next year. I'm sure you'll love it. And Ellen, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.